what is freedom?
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent question. What is freedom?
That's a great question. Can you make the decisions you want to make every single day? It's interesting. We're in Dubai right now, and some people leave in my comments, "Oh, you're not free to say what you want to say." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like when I said what I wanted to say, I was deplatformed by companies in America. If I'm not careful, the UK will have policemen knocking at my door. Who's free? What about when they take my money away from me without me asking? Is there freedom there? So it's definitely an interesting question to ask.
It's a huge question. I think there's a lot of false dichotomies that exist in modern society and culture. And I think one of the most common ones, actually particularly amongst more conservative people, is this idea that freedom and safety are opposites. And so in order to have that, you can't have high freedom and high safety. And that if you want freedom, you've got to sacrifice a ton of safety. If you want safety, you've got to sacrifice a ton of freedom. I think I know why people believe that, but it's simply inaccurate. And it also depends, like you said, on an individual definition of freedom, because I would make the argument that you can't have freedom without a basic level of safety. And I don't mean fake safety. I don't mean like sort of safetyism and the feeling of safety. I mean actual safety and security in the way that in Dubai you are actually physically safe. The probability of getting robbed or assaulted or murdered or anything bad happening to you is one of the lowest in the entire world. And with that comes a degree of safety. The way you and I are dressed and are right now, we are freer in Dubai than we are in London. If you're in London, maybe take that watch off, buddy. Maybe tone it down a little bit. And so on paper, someone could make an argument that, London is a freer society or freer city than Dubai is. But if you can't even wear a nice watch or some nice things because you're so worried that someone is going to take something from you, or you're a woman and you can't walk past a certain time at night, like, are you free? Again, on paper, yeah, you have these liberties. But in reality, you can't go for a jog at 8 p.m. with your headphones on because this can be applied to lots of different places. So I'm like, well, are you free then? And then you've got the whole question of taxation, where it's like, well, someone will be yelling at me your freedom. And I'm like, hey, what happens if you don't pay your taxes this year? You go to prison. You go to jail if you don't give 30, 40, 50% of everything you make to the government. I'm like, well, are you free? You've been programmed to believe you're free, but are you? And I think it's a very interesting debate and conversation, and it makes people very uncomfortable. Because particularly if you're coming from the West, especially the USA, you've been told your entire life since before you were born, this is the freest country in the world. There is nowhere that even compares. We have all this. And in some elements, you could make that argument. I can think of certain categories you could argue that the USA is the freest country in the world. And I can also make other arguments where I'm like, well, no, actually, it's not. Maybe the freest parts of the world are like rural red state USA. Maybe if you live in like Wisconsin out in the sticks and you're away from the cities and you've kind of got max liberty on paper and in reality, and you've also got a high degree of safety as well because you're not in some like bad inner city environment or whatever. No one's going to predate upon you. Your neighbors are looking out for you. Maybe that is quite close to the maximum of both. But if you're just living in, I don't know, Manhattan or the Bronx or the hood in LA or whatever, what do you mean? Yeah, you're free to shoot heroin on the street, and you're free to take a dump on the street in San Francisco if you want to.
You're free to live on the streets.
Yeah, you're free to run around naked and be a degenerate. Maybe you're free to smoke weed or whatever. But like, in terms of stuff that actually matters, I'd argue no, you're not. And even if you are free, maybe you've just become a slave to your sin.
Yeah, we're seeing these parallel universes evolve. Dubai is the perfect example. So we're seeing an example of how people can live. And it's amazing to just look at that parallel universe compared to America or Western Europe. You could say the same with, Bitcoin and the financial system. You see these parallel worlds where you can, for the first time ever, maybe really get a sample and see, okay, what are the differences here? And, in our Western democracies, we're so aloof, because we've been programmed that, first of all, democracy is better. I don't know if that's true for every country, every geopolitical entity. I don't know if there ever will be a democracy in Russia. If you read the 1,000-year history of Russia, it seems to do this repetitive cycle. So I don't know. But when you come to a place like this, you realize, okay, wow, this works pretty well. And you start to see Wow. Yeah. Taxation is a violation of your freedom somehow. Yeah. It's theft, and not to mention inflation and everything else. And rural America might be better, but what happens when the federal government tells you what your kids have to learn in school, or they start making financial decisions for you? So even that could be tricky. Or what happened when the ATF knocks on your door and says you can't have that many guns? Then those people get real upset. So these are great questions to have. I'm spending a lot of time in Dubai right now. I love London. I spent 20 some years of my life there. I named my show after London. I ran for mayor of London. My kids were born there. But I now think it's headed down a very dark road, and I don't see it bottoming out for 50 years. And I think it's time to vote with my feet and start making decisions to be in the right places with the right energy.
Yeah. And a lot of people are feeling that way. That sentiment is pretty common now. And I understand it completely. I left the UK in 2021. And I wasn't living in London at the time. I'd left London in 2010 and had no intention of living in London again. And honestly, now I don't have intention of living in the UK again. And I say this as someone who loves huge numbers of things about the UK. I think the UK and British culture has been a massive net positive locally and internationally. I just think the country is on a very sad trajectory, and I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel and the glimpses that I see, for example, in the U.S. The USA has a ton of problems, but it's so large and dynamic, and there's so much prosperity and opportunity that even if certain parts of the country are on a decline, there's other ones that are, improving, and there's just so much innovation, whereas in the UK, that is just being choked out. And instead of trying to respond to that in a sensible way, they are continuing to squeeze and push out the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the people who, if you had intelligent leaders, the kinds of people that Dubai is trying to bring in, the UK is pushing out. And it's just bonkers to me. It seems so short-sighted. So just looping this back around on a point you were making earlier, it's kind of fascinating how with this concept of democracy, which on paper, we've all certainly been raised to believe that, democracy is an inherent good. I find it quite fascinating how, if I think of my entire life, and I think of the presidents of the USA, and I think of the prime ministers of the UK during my lifetime, why is it that it's so difficult across all these countries? You can expand this to Europe, you can expand it to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, many of these nations, these so-called liberal democracies. Like, why does it seem so difficult, if not impossible, to even get a leader that most people like?